All defense stations, emergency alert. A colossal unidentified warship has entered our space. The Tarkisian Empire had never known true fear, until now. Their civilization was one of the galaxy's most advanced, known for their vast warfleets and ruthless conquests. No enemy had ever dared breach their borders without being obliterated in an instant. But this was different. There was something about the unknown ship that sent shivers down even the bravest of warriors' spines. It was massive, larger than any vessel they had ever seen, and it had appeared without warning. No signals, no diplomatic hails. Just an enormous craft, silently drifting towards Tarkisian space, untouched by the sensors that should have detected it long before it entered their system. No radar, no energy readings, no heat signatures. The ship simply appeared. The High Command scrambled to assess the situation. On the bridge of the flagship Aurora, Grand Strategist Valethor stood motionless, staring at the viewport. His 3 glowing eyes narrowed as he considered the possibilities. His fingers hovered over the activation buttons to alert the entire fleet to the incoming threat. His mind raced. Is it an enemy warship? A trap? An unknown power? Status report, Valethor commanded. His communications officer, still visibly shaken, turned to face him. Sir, we've attempted several scans, but there's nothing. No radiation, no energy signatures. It's as if this ship is invisible to our technology. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The idea of an enemy ship sneaking through their defenses was unheard of. But there it was, on their sensors, a massive warship, approaching fast. Prepare the fleet, Valethor ordered. We are not taking any chances. Dispatch all scouts for immediate reconnaissance. Activate the battle formations. The atmosphere in the war room was tense. The Tarkisian Empire had fought countless battles over the centuries, defeating enemies from every corner of the galaxy. Their ships, their weapons, their tactics were unmatched. But nothing in their training had prepared them for an adversary that seemed to break the very laws of physics. We need answers, Valethor, one of the council members said, his voice strained with frustration. We cannot wait any longer. We need to know who this is, what they want, and whether they come to destroy us. Valethor clenched his fists. His mind was racing, piecing together the fragments of information. A ship this large, this silent. It had to be an invasion. But why had they not seen it coming? Why no signs of life or activity? Suddenly, a low hum vibrated the hull of the ship. A sound so deep, so resonant, that it made the Tarkisian's skin crawl. The hum turned into a sharp, metallic sound as their comms officer reported a transmission coming in. Put it through, Valethor ordered, his voice steady but cold. The screen flickered to life, and there it was, a figure. A human figure, standing in a darkened room, the faint glow of the ship's interior lights casting eerie shadows. His voice echoed through the ship's speakers, calm, controlled, and entirely unlike any adversary Valethor had ever encountered. Attention, Tarkisian High Command. This is Admiral Rains of the United Earth Forces. We come in peace. However, you will find your weapons ineffective against us. We are not here to fight, but to test. The words were chilling. Rains' tone was not that of a conqueror or a warmonger, it was calm, almost dismissive. But the sheer audacity of the message rattled Valethor to his core. Test. Valethor muttered, unable to mask his disbelief. You dare enter our space, demand our attention, and speak of tests. The human smiled faintly, as if amused by the questions that followed. Yes. A test. A test to see if your civilization has the strength and wisdom to evolve. But I assure you, it is not a test you can fail, because the consequences would be far too great for you to bear. Valethor's claws tightened around the control panel in front of him. The arrogance, the confidence of this human. The Tarkisians had always seen themselves as the superior species in the galaxy, but now, in the face of this unknown ship, they were shaken. "Why have you come here?" Veilthor demanded, his voice firm. Admiral Rains didn't hesitate. "We are not here to conquer. But we will stop your empire from destroying what it has yet to understand. Your warships are nothing against us, let me show you." The transmission cut out before Veilthor could respond. The room was silent. The Tarkisians could only stare at the empty screen. What had just happened? Was it a bluff? Or had they truly encountered something beyond their comprehension? Veilthor turned to his officers, his face grim. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered again, this time with more urgency. "Activate the defense systems. If this is a test, it is one we will not fail." As the Tarkisian warships moved into battle formation, an eerie sense of foreboding filled the room. They were about to face an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered, an enemy that had already shown them their power, but also their mercy. The unknown warship remained stationary, watching, waiting, as if it had all the time in the universe. Veilthor's voice echoed through the chamber, carrying with it a weight of both uncertainty and resolve. "We will see just how powerful humanity really is." The Tarkisian fleet was in full battle readiness, the warships lined up in formation, their engines glowing a fierce, intimidating red. As the command ship Aurora drifted into position, its sleek hull gleamed under the artificial stars of the Tarkisian space station. Every crew member aboard was tense, their nerves taut with the knowledge that they were preparing for something that could very well lead to their destruction. The calm of space was broken only by the sharp orders echoing through the ship's corridors. Grand Strategist Veilthor stood at the helm, his glowing eyes focused intently on the vast expanse of space outside the viewport. The human ship had not moved, still a silent, ominous presence in their midst. The confidence exuded by Admiral Rains on the comms earlier had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. There was something unnerving about the human's demeanor, calm, yet unwavering. It felt almost as if the human had no fear of Tarkisian might. "All ships, hold position," Veilthor commanded, his voice firm and unwavering. "Prepare to launch all fighters. We engage at my order." His voice was steady, but the uncertainty lingered. There was something in the air, a kind of electricity, a feeling of waiting for a storm to break. And then, without warning, the sensors began to beep urgently. "Commander. Sensor anomalies. No, wait, it's gone." Veilthor whipped his head around to face the officer, his three glowing eyes narrowing in confusion. "What is it, officer?" The officer, pale and clearly rattled, turned the screen toward him. The anomaly had vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only empty space. "Impossible," Veilthor muttered under his breath. The Tarkisian Empire's sensors were state-of-the-art, designed to detect even the faintest presence of any object in their space. But this, whatever it was, had slipped through their most advanced systems without a trace. He turned to his tactical officer. "Prepare the fighters anyway. We will not be caught off guard again." As the Aurora and its fleet closed in, the vastness of the human warship loomed even larger. The tension was palpable, and despite the bravado on display, Veilthor knew deep down that something was off. The human ship's silence wasn't the calm before an attack, it was the calm before something much more sinister. "Commander Veilthor," came a voice over the comm, one of his intelligence officers. "We've intercepted another transmission from the human vessel. They say we are the test." A cold shiver ran down Veilthor's spine at the mention of the word test. What did this human mean by that? A test? Was it some kind of psychological maneuver? Or did the humans have something more powerful than the Tarkisians had even begun to comprehend? "Play the transmission," Veilthor ordered. His mind raced. The screen flickered to life once again, revealing the calm face of Admiral Rains, his expression unreadable. High Command, Rains began, his voice resonating through the silence. I urge you to think carefully before you continue with this approach. The outcome is not one you will want to face. Your warships, your tactics, your weapons, none of them will save you from what you are about to encounter. There was a brief pause, and Valethor found himself holding his breath. What was coming? What did the human know that they didn't? We do not seek to destroy you, Rains continued, his tone almost compassionate. We are offering you a choice. But make no mistake, if you insist on resistance, you will experience a demonstration of our power, something that will make your strongest warship seem like toys in comparison. A jolt of panic ran through the Tarkisian bridge. What kind of power could a species this primitive possess? The human warship had no visible weapon systems, no visible means of propulsion, nothing to indicate it could match the Tarkisian fleet in any way. But what if they were wrong? What if the human ship was hiding something? We are not just showing strength, Valethor, Rains concluded, his voice still calm but carrying a layer of something else, something almost personal. We are showing you mercy. I hope you understand the difference. With that, the transmission ended, leaving the Tarkisian crew in stunned silence. It felt as though the very air in the command room had thickened, and the uncertainty that had settled over the fleet became palpable. How had they ended up in this situation? Where had they gone wrong? What was this human, Admiral Rains, really capable of? Initiate the attack. Valethor barked, his voice filled with urgency. He couldn't allow any more hesitation. If they let this human ship dictate the terms of battle, they might as well surrender now. He was confident that the Tarkisians would prevail. After all, their technology had never failed them before. Fighter craft were launched, their sleek forms cutting through space, weapon systems primed for the anticipated assault. But as they moved toward the human ship, the scene took an unexpected turn. The human warship, which had remained still and silent, suddenly sparked to life. An energy shield shimmered into view, encasing the entire vessel. It was a perfect shield, undetectable by the Tarkisian sensors until it had already activated. Impossible. Valethor growled. Our weapons cannot penetrate that shield. Before anyone could respond, the Tarkisian fleet was thrown into chaos. A sudden burst of energy, stronger than anything Valethor had seen before, shot out from the human warship, hitting one of their fighters. The ship didn't explode, it simply vanished, as if it had been erased from existence. The bridge crew gasped, and Valethor's mind raced. How could this be? This human vessel had defied all known laws of physics. The Tarkisians were not used to being on the receiving end of such overwhelming power. All ships, retreat. Now! Valethor screamed, his voice filled with desperation. But it was too late. The demonstration of power had already been made. The humans weren't just testing them, they were sending a message. A sharp realization hit Valethor in the gut. They were no longer in control of the situation. The Tarkisian fleet was in disarray, its once ordered formation shattered. The fighters, which had been dispatched with high hopes of overwhelming the human ship, now drifted aimlessly, their systems disabled by a power unlike anything they had encountered before. Valethor's command ship, the Aurora, had managed to evade the initial barrage, but it had not escaped unscathed. Several of its systems were down, and the emergency lights flickered overhead. On the bridge of the Aurora, the atmosphere was thick with frustration. The once confident crew now murmured in shock and disbelief. For a moment, Valethor himself felt a cold sweat running down his spine. He had faced countless battles, victories, and defeats, but never before had he felt so completely outmatched. "Commander, we are unable to detect any weak points in the human vessel's shields," the lead technician reported, his voice shaking slightly. "All attempts to lock onto it with our weapon systems have failed." Valethor gripped the armrests of his chair, his three glowing eyes narrowing in concentration. This is not possible. There must be a weakness. There always is. But the human warship defied all logic. Its shield was unlike anything the Tarkisians had ever encountered. It didn't just block the weaponry, it absorbed it, rendering it useless before it even made contact. And that energy burst, it wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It was like a force, a presence that simply wiped out everything in its path. The comms beeped, drawing Veilthor's attention. A transmission from the human warship had come through, but it wasn't Admiral Rains this time. The message was in the form of a simple text display, and as Veilthor read it, his frustration deepened. To all Tarkisian forces, your warships are impressive. But we are not here to destroy. We are here to teach. The message was chilling. The humans weren't merely taunting them, they were deliberately pushing them into a position where they were forced to confront the truth of their own limitations. How can they know this? Veilthor muttered under his breath. They don't know us. They don't know our strengths or our strategies. Yet somehow, this human fleet was not just observing, they were anticipating. Their actions seemed deliberate, their every move calculated to expose the weaknesses of the Tarkisian approach. This was no ordinary battle. A deep voice echoed from the corner of the bridge, pulling Veilthor out of his thoughts. "Commander, I have an idea," said his strategist, Varkan, a veteran of many wars, his face grim but determined. Veilthor turned toward him, his expression expectant. "Go on, Varkan. I'm listening." "We need to stop thinking of them as just another enemy. This human fleet, they are not acting like invaders. They're conducting an exercise, a test of some kind. If we continue to approach them with force, we will only reinforce their perception of us as lesser beings. I suggest we try diplomacy instead." The room fell silent. The idea of diplomacy with an enemy who had just demonstrated godlike power seemed absurd, yet Veilthor knew that the tide of battle was no longer in his favor. The humans had already demonstrated that they could outmaneuver and outgun the Tarkisian fleet at will. But diplomacy, how do we approach them without appearing weak? Veilthor asked, his voice low. They could crush us in an instant. That's the point, Varkan replied, we need to show that we are willing to understand them, to listen to their message. They are not interested in annihilation. They are interested in something more, something beyond conquest. Veilthor chewed on these words. For the first time, he considered that perhaps the humans were not like any enemy they had faced before. Maybe they were a test of something deeper. But could he afford to trust them? Could he risk showing vulnerability? As Veilthor pondered this, another voice chimed in. It was the officer who had first detected the anomaly. "Commander," the officer called, panic creeping into his voice. "We've detected something, a massive energy buildup on the human vessel. It's unlike anything we've seen." Veilthor stood up quickly, his thoughts scattering as he turned toward the screen. There, in the distance, the human warship shimmered, its shield glowing brighter than before, pulsing with a strange energy that rippled through space. The tension on the bridge reached a breaking point. The Tarkisian fleet was helpless against this kind of power. How long before the human ship unleashed whatever force it had been gathering? "All ships, prepare to move into position," Veilthor commanded, his voice now laced with urgency. "We have to know what they're planning before they strike again." But as the Tarkisian fleet repositioned, the human ship did something unexpected. It powered down. Every shield, every weapon system, completely silent. The humans were waiting. Why would they stop? Veilthor wondered aloud, confusion clouding his mind. What do they want from us? Then, for the first time, Admiral Rain's face appeared on the screen, calm and serene as ever. "Commander Veilthor," Rain said softly, his voice as steady as before. "You've made your move, and now it's our turn. We've been watching you closely, observing your tactics and your strategies. And while you've been effective at one point, you're missing something vital, the human spirit. Valethor's heart skipped a beat. He knew instinctively that whatever was coming next, it was more than just a battle. It was a confrontation on a level the Tarkisians had never imagined. "You've been testing us," Valethor said, a realization dawning on him. "But now, we must test you." Rains didn't reply immediately, his gaze steady and intense. Then, finally, he spoke, "The test has already begun." With a flick of his hand, Rains activated something. The entire human warship shifted and changed, its hull expanding and folding, revealing what seemed like an entirely different ship inside. The shield shimmered away, and in its place appeared a mass of dark energy, a weapon unlike anything Valethor could comprehend. It was not just a weapon. It was a declaration of dominance. The Tarkisian fleet had underestimated humanity, and now, they would pay the price. The Tarkisian fleet hung suspended in space, the massive warships dwarfed by the immense, shifting human warship that loomed before them. The once confident Tarkisians were now unsure, their once unshakable resolve fractured by the sheer scale of the unknown threat they faced. The energy emanating from the human vessel felt like an invisible weight pressing down on them, and the Tarkisian officers could sense it. This was a battle not just for survival, but for understanding. Valethor's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the command chair. The sudden revelation of the human ship's true form, its hull folding and unfolding, revealing new weapon systems and an advanced structure, had left him in awe. How could a single species harness such power? Admiral Rain's voice had come through the communication system, steady and calm as ever. But to Valethor, it sounded like a threat wrapped in a paradoxical cloak of peace. "We've shown you our strength, Commander. Now, it's time for you to understand what humanity truly is." The words hung in the air, almost mocking in their simplicity. Humanity? This species had stunned them at every turn, and yet they spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. Valethor had seen power before. But this was different. This wasn't just about weapons or tactics. It was a clash of ideologies, of spirit. And in that, Valethor felt his grip on the situation slipping. "Commander," Varkon spoke up, his voice cautious. "We cannot sit here forever. The humans are preparing for something we might not be able to defend against. We need to make a decision." Valethor's eyes narrowed. He had known the Tarkisians had a natural tendency to dominate, to strike with overwhelming force and outnumber their foes. But facing an enemy whose actions defied conventional tactics, whose presence seemed to demand something more than brute strength, was something Valethor wasn't prepared for. For the first time, he felt uncertain. The arrogance that had defined him for years as a military commander seemed foolish in the face of this unexpected foe. "We could launch a full-scale attack," Varkon suggested, his eyes calculating. "It's risky, but it may be the only way to force the humans into a retreat." "No," Valethor snapped, his voice sharp. "The human ship has shown us it can absorb and redirect our best efforts. A frontal assault would only play into their hands." Valethor stood, pacing the bridge as he mulled over his options. His mind raced through past battles, searching for something, anything, that could give him an advantage. But there was nothing. The humans had removed all of their options for a decisive strike. "There is no winning this by brute force," Valethor muttered to himself. "We need to approach this differently. We need to understand them." Varkon raised an eyebrow, sensing the shift in Valethor's demeanor. "What are you suggesting, Commander?" Valethor turned slowly, his expression resolute. "We open communication with them, on their terms. We need to understand their goals, their intentions. They're not here to conquer us, and I believe they may be testing us, pushing us to see if we can rise to the challenge." For a moment, there was silence. The Tarkisian officers exchanged wary glances, unsure of the wisdom in Valethor's words. But they trusted him, and they knew there was no alternative. The human ship had already demonstrated it could obliterate their fleet with a single move if it so desired. "All right," Varkon said after a pause, "I'll prepare the comms." As the technician initiated the transmission, Veilthor took a deep breath. The future of the Tarkisian fleet rested on this next exchange. If he failed to navigate this moment carefully, it could be the end of everything. On the display, the image of Admiral Rains appeared once more, his expression unshaken. His presence was calm, almost meditative, as though the entire crisis unfolding in space didn't faze him in the least. "Commander Veilthor," Rains said, his voice like a quiet ripple through the tension. "I see you've reconsidered. Good. You're beginning to understand that strength is not just measured by firepower." Veilthor bit back the frustration threatening to rise in his throat. "Then what is it measured by? What do you want from us?" Rains smiled faintly. "What we want from you is simple: acknowledgement. We want you to see that war is not the only path forward. Humanity has risen to power through cooperation, resilience, and the strength of its people. We've learned that true victory comes not from conquest, but from understanding." Veilthor recoiled slightly. "You speak of understanding, yet your actions have been nothing but aggressive. What is your true goal?" The image of Rains flickered briefly, and when it returned, his tone had shifted, less calm, more intense. "We didn't choose this war, Veilthor. But we will never back down when faced with a challenge. Your species is strong, but you've forgotten how to look beyond the battlefield. We are offering you a chance to step into a future where strength is defined by compassion, by wisdom, and by the willingness to learn." Veilthor's mind spun. He had been trained to lead through force, to crush his enemies beneath the weight of superior strength. But what if this was a test of something deeper, something he had never been taught to value? Could there be another way to approach this battle? "You want us to change?" Veilthor asked, his voice quiet. "Not change," Rains answered. "We want you to evolve. Together, we can create something more than either of us could alone. But it's up to you whether you accept this challenge." The message was clear, and yet Veilthor couldn't shake the feeling that he had been presented with an ultimatum. Fight and face certain destruction, or accept this offer and risk everything he had ever known. "What happens if we don't accept?" Veilthor asked, his voice low. The silence that followed was deafening. Rains' eyes softened, but his message remained unwavering. "You will find out soon enough." As the transmission ended, the Tarkisian fleet remained suspended in space, the weight of their decision hanging heavy in the air. The Tarkisian fleet remained eerily still, like a predator caught between two paths, one leading to certain destruction, the other to an uncertain but potentially transformative future. Commander Veilthor stood alone in his private command chamber, staring out at the vast expanse of space. The stars twinkled like distant whispers, and for the first time in his life, he felt utterly lost. The weight of the decision hung over him, an oppressive force that threatened to crush him under its enormity. "Commander, the fleet is ready," Varkon's voice crackled through the communication system, snapping Veilthor out of his reverie. "What is your decision?" Veilthor's gaze never left the stars. He had led the Tarkisian people to victory countless times, but never had the cost felt so high. The human warship, massive, seemingly indestructible, and yet holding back its full potential, had not just challenged their fleet, it had forced Veilthor to confront the very nature of power itself. He had spent his entire life learning to command with strength, to dominate his enemies through superior firepower and tactics. But Admiral Rains had shattered that worldview in a matter of minutes. The human wasn't interested in simply winning, he wanted something more. Something Veilthor had never been taught to value. "I don't know, Varkon," Veilthor muttered, his voice thick with frustration. "I'm not sure we can trust them. What if this is just a ploy to weaken us, to get us to surrender?" Varkon's voice softened, the usual sharpness gone. Commander, we've seen what they're capable of. They have the strength to destroy us in an instant. And yet, they offered us peace, under their terms, yes, but still peace. We've spent too long clinging to old ways. Maybe it's time to change. Veilthor clenched his fists. He had trained his entire life to protect his people, to defend them from any threat, no matter the cost. And yet here was a force that seemed to embody everything he had been taught to fear, an enemy that fought not for domination, but for cooperation. What if they're lying? Veilthor's voice was barely a whisper. What if they're just playing us? Then we will fight them as we always have, Varkon replied, but at least we'll know we tried. At least we'll know we didn't let fear dictate our future. Veilthor paused, the truth of Varkon's words sinking in. For the first time in his career, he realized that fear of change, fear of the unknown, had been the true enemy all along. He had been so focused on winning, on maintaining control, that he had never stopped to ask why he was fighting in the first place. He turned to face the communication terminal. Open a channel. It's time. The view of Admiral Rains appeared once more, his expression as calm and composed as ever. But this time, there was something different in his eyes, an almost imperceptible glimmer of hope. Commander Veilthor, Rains began, his voice steady. I'm glad to see you've reconsidered. You've made the right choice. Veilthor's heart raced. This was it, the moment that would define the future of both their species. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the next words. We accept your offer, Admiral, Veilthor said, his voice firm. But I need to know one thing before we proceed. What happens if we choose to trust you? Rains smiled, the corners of his lips curling upward. What happens, Commander, is that you will be part of something greater than war. You will be part of the future, a future where strength is measured by the bonds we forge, not the battles we win. For a moment, there was silence. Veilthor could feel the weight of Rain's words pressing against him, but he held firm. He had made the choice, now, there was no turning back. I'm willing to take that risk, Veilthor said, his voice unwavering. Rains nodded. Then let us begin. The Tarkisian fleet slowly moved forward, its ships lined up in formation, but this time they were not advancing for battle. They were advancing for something else, something entirely new. As the massive human warship lowered its weapons, Veilthor felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't a victory in the traditional sense, but it was a victory nonetheless. It was the victory of understanding, of opening themselves up to the possibility of something greater. Back on the bridge, Varkon looked at Veilthor with a mixture of awe and respect. You've done it, Commander. We've chosen a different path. Veilthor met his gaze. We've chosen the right one. The space between the Tarkisian and human fleets remained vast, a stark reminder of the differences between the two species. Yet, despite the distance, there was a palpable sense of cautious optimism among the Tarkisian officers as they prepared for the first true meeting of their species. Commander Veilthor stood at the helm of his ship, the bridge alive with activity as the human warship prepared to dock. The crew's movements were swift and purposeful, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. The Tarkisians were a proud people, their history one of dominance and strength, and the idea of surrendering even a fraction of their autonomy to another race, especially humans, was a hard pill to swallow. Varkon stepped up beside Veilthor, his expression unreadable. Do you think we can truly trust them, Commander? After everything we've seen, can we believe they won't take advantage of us? Veilthor turned his gaze to the view screen, where the human warship loomed, its sleek form almost too perfect to be real. He had seen the immense power it wielded, and though it had shown restraint, he knew it could turn lethal in an instant. Yet the words of Admiral Rains echoed in his mind, we are not conquerors. We are partners. I hope so, Veilthor said, his voice barely above a whisper. But hope alone is not enough. In the docking bay, the human officers were already waiting, their expressions neutral but their posture betraying a readiness for anything. Rains stepped forward, his uniform perfectly pressed, his eyes focused but calm. Valethor walked toward him, his boots clicking against the cold metal floor, the sound almost too loud in the silence that enveloped the room. The two leaders stopped in front of each other. For a moment, neither spoke, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Finally, Valethor broke the silence. "We've agreed to this alliance, Admiral," Valethor said, his tone measured but firm. "But I need to know, can you guarantee the safety of my people? Can you assure me that we will not become pawns in a greater game?" Rain's gaze softened, and for the first time since they had met, Valethor saw something in his eyes, something that wasn't just calculated strategy. There was sincerity there, a flicker of something deeper. "We can't guarantee safety, Commander," Rains replied, his voice steady. "But what we can guarantee is that we will not exploit you. We're not here to dominate. We're here to offer a choice to forge a new path, together." Varkon, who had been standing silently by Valethor's side, leaned in and whispered, "Commander, do you believe him?" Valethor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he met Rain's gaze, searching for any hint of deception. And in that moment, something shifted within him. He saw no lies, no hidden agenda, just a man who had seen the horrors of war and wanted something different. "I believe him," Valethor said, more to himself than to anyone else. "We will proceed." The negotiations began in earnest. Tarkisian and human officers sat around a table, the hum of the ship's engines the only sound that broke the silence. Maps of planets, trade routes, and defensive positions were laid out before them, the complexities of diplomacy unfolding with every word spoken. But even as they worked toward an agreement, the tension between the two species was undeniable. The Tarkisians were cautious, still holding on to their centuries-old ways, while the humans were eager but respectful, careful not to push too hard. It was a delicate balance, and at times, it seemed as though it might shatter under the weight of mistrust. In the middle of one of the tense discussions, a Tarkisian officer stood abruptly, his voice raised in frustration. "We can't trust them," he shouted. "They're offering us scraps, and we're supposed to accept this? We should fight for what's ours." Valethor stood and raised a hand, silencing the room. "Sit down, Commander," he commanded, his voice cold but firm. "We are not fighting anymore. We've made a choice to change. And that means we must trust." The officer hesitated but eventually sat back down, his gaze fixed on the table, simmering with anger. Valethor's words had stilled the room, but the tension remained, thick and uncomfortable. As the days passed, the Tarkisians and humans worked tirelessly, hammering out the details of their alliance. Slowly, the trust between them began to grow, albeit in small, cautious steps. Valethor could see the changes happening within his own crew, too. Some were still skeptical, but many began to recognize that this new path could offer something they had never considered before: peace, security, and a future beyond endless warfare. Varkon approached Valethor one evening as they stood on the observation deck, watching the stars pass by. "Commander, I have to admit," Varkon said, his voice quieter than usual. "I didn't think this would work. I didn't think peace was even possible." Valethor turned to face him, his expression softening. "I didn't think so either. But sometimes, we have to choose the hard path, the one that scares us. And right now, peace is the hardest choice." Varkon nodded, his eyes reflective. "You've changed, Commander. We've all changed." Valethor's gaze drifted back to the stars. He wasn't sure if this alliance would truly work, if humanity could be trusted, or if this fragile peace would survive the trials ahead. But for the first time in his life, he had a glimpse of something he had never dared to hope for, a future where strength wasn't defined by how much you could destroy, but by how much you could protect. The alliance had been forged, but the road ahead was fraught with challenges. Commander Valethor stared at the holographic display on the command center's table, the planets and systems blinking in front of him like a map to an uncertain future. Every piece of it felt like a delicate thread, fragile and easily snapped. The Tarkisians and humans had managed to reach an agreement, but what they hadn't accounted for was the unexpected arrival of a rogue faction from another galaxy. This new faction, known only as the Zyrak, had a reputation for annihilating civilizations that appeared weak or disorganized. The Tarkisians, despite their advanced technology and history of conquest, were vulnerable without the full commitment of their human allies. And now, as the Zyrak fleet descended on the nearby planet of Zyros, an uninhabited world that had been earmarked as a joint base for the Alliance, the stakes had never been higher. Commander Valethor stood with Admiral Rains and the combined fleet of Tarkisian and human warships, preparing for a battle that could either define or destroy their fragile peace. The Zyrak's advance was swift, and they had no interest in negotiating. They wanted a show of power, a challenge that would break their enemies before they had a chance to rise. "Commander, this is it," Admiral Rains said, his voice steady, but there was an edge to it. "We hold them off here, or we lose everything." Valethor's gaze was unwavering, his mind racing. "We cannot let them divide us. This is the moment that will define us, Admiral. We must hold our ground." Varkon, still unsure of the alliance, stepped forward, his voice low but filled with conviction. "And what if we lose, Commander? What if we're outmatched?" Valethor turned to him, his eyes cold and resolute. "Then we fight together, and we die together, with honor." As the Zyrak ships closed in, the human warships, along with the Tarkisian fleet, formed a defensive line, their weapons charged and ready. The space around them grew tense, every captain on edge. They could feel the weight of the decision. They were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for something far greater than themselves. They were fighting for the future. The battle began as a barrage of laser fire from the Zyrak ships tore through the darkness of space. The Alliance's fleets retaliated with everything they had, their combined firepower pushing back the Zyrak assault. But the Zyrak were relentless, their ships designed for shock and awe, tearing through the Tarkisian ships with terrifying efficiency. Valethor watched as one of the Tarkisian vessels was struck, its hull buckling under the pressure. He could hear the faint sound of alarms echoing through the walls of his own ship, but he stayed focused. He had to be the rock, the unshakable force. If he faltered, his people would follow suit.